This is the Lit Within podcast, The Drive Within. Join us as we go inside the racer's mind to explore what it takes to be a consistent winner on the track. I'm Lewis Buxton.
And I'm Michael Gilmore.
Welcome, Michael. Today we're discussing the standout moments from the Hungarian Grand Prix, that epic battle between Hamilton and Alonso, Ocon's victory, Bottas crashing out, Vettel's disqualification, Sainz overruling race strategy, and the relationship between data and pure feel on the track. So the winner of the Hungarian Grand Prix was Esteban Ocon, but the story we're going to start with was one of the most entertaining parts of the race, which was the battle between Hamilton and Alonso. A frustrated Lewis was stuck behind Alonso for a long time, unexpectedly with the best car, possibly the best driving skills to go along with it, and Alonso used every ounce of his will, his skill if you like, to hold him off and provide that gap for his teammate to take the victory. Michael, obviously it was a great race for Alpine. You've had some insights listening to Rosberg about finding the gap, the opportunities that are there for drivers. Give us some insights into what you were seeing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Lewis, because, you know, within Formula One, there's stories happening within stories. There's so many different kind of strands to what's going on. And for those that are kind of close to the sport or appreciate all the nuances, that's where the excitement is at. The people that dislike most about it, obviously, when it's kind of follow the leader, and that's why the attention wasn't on Ocon so much, because there was no action happening out there. So the story was really the battle for fourth, which, position occupied by, as you say, Alonso, with Hamilton closing fast. And by the time he caught up with him, the prediction was that he would be right behind Vettel in second, with 10 laps to go. So in other words, the race was then within his grasp almost. So much so that Toto jumped on the team radio with that kind of, I love the quotes from team radio because they can often turn into memes, and go down in that sort of meme history. And he said, Lewis, it's Toto, we can win this.
Lewis, you can win this.
And that's it, the simple instruction. And winning is what it's all about. And yet, obviously, what happened there was Hamilton then obviously become frustrated, having to kind of try and get past the very wide vehicle that Alonso managed to create for 10 laps. So that really cost him the race, not his own performance, the inability to figure out where the overtake was, which ultimately turned out to be turn 2, as Max Verstappen kind of got to grips with in shorter time. So what was interesting for me is that Lewis seemed to just, in his frustrations, which is unusual for him, and again, these are just my own sort of personal observations, but he seemed to let that get to him a little bit. And, some complaints we could hear and so on, that he is he deviating from his line? He's all over the place here, and questioning how close to being and racing fair, because obviously you can't change line deliberately to block someone, but of course you're allowed to run wide if necessary, or other tactics to make your car as wide as possible. And Fernando was a defence masterclass, really, with what he'd done with that. He really had the upper hand for 10 laps, which is fantastic. But yeah, the interesting aspect to it, I think, is what people see within the race as to what he needs to do. And when Hamilton came out on fresh tyres, the mediums, everyone was kind of, right, it's hammer time, and they're all getting excited that he would have the tyres and therefore the grip to be able to overtake and get to the front. And Simon Lazenby, when he talked about it, he was surprised that Lewis wasn't going quite quick enough and maybe should get the hammer down a bit more. And yeah, Nico, he had to explain and then went on to explain again that the fact that the tyres, although they were 40-lap tyres in terms of the longevity, they actually was only 20 laps rest of the race. So in theory, you could shred them. There was no risk to them not getting through the race, so you could give it as much gas as you wanted. Where the reality was, and that Roscoe kind of keenly pointed out, was they need 3 laps to cure. In other words, to become, race ready and therefore extract the maximum grip that was available from the tyres for the rest of the race. You need to kind of bed them in or run them in, whatever you want to call it, cure, etc., to be able to then get the fastest. So that was really, quite insightful for me. And these are the kind of things that the driver has to be aware of when they're getting instructions, even from Lewis's own race engineer, of yeah, it's hammer time, Lewis, come on, let's go. And I think Rosberg quoted at that time and just said, hang on, I'm not sure that's quite right. As I said, he needs to probably, scrub these tyres in.
Yeah, because obviously I don't know that much about F1, but it's become more interesting to me because of things like Drive to Survive on Netflix, watching that. Yeah. It's just interesting how they prepare. And then I'm cross-referencing that with other sports and football in particular because of my background. But I think what I did notice within that was there was an expectation for Lewis to get past and he didn't. And his frustration, I think he said, he was on the radio and he said something like, he keeps cutting me up. He keeps cutting across me. But it was almost, Lewis has obviously won serial championships and maybe the all-time greatest driver in that sport. But even to see someone like him just have that, which when you boil it down reminded me of quite a childish quip. We all have our moments. And he's no different there. He just got a bit frustrated. And it kind of, when we spoke about it, kind of had a bit of an agreement that it looked like it clouded his vision a little bit. And then it took a while for that to descend before he got his pure driver head back on and found a way to pass him. Whereas without that, potentially Rosberg saw it sooner, Verstappen saw it sooner. If he had that clearer mindset, do you think it would have made a difference in that moment? Because that's what everyone wants to know. Everyone wants to be like Lewis Hamilton in Formula One. Everybody that's in Formula One wants to be like him, and anyone that aspires to get in a race car or a kart or any type of racing, they're going to look up to him. And it's just interesting to see what percentage is driver, what percentage is car, what percentage, and how do you get such a mindset like Lewis, where he just seems to be able to find a way to win, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there, really, in what you said, a lot of different aspects. So to kind of touch on a couple of those points, I think the first thing was his frustrations he had over team radio, and that I think that started off in a normal fashion that you might expect from a driver like Lewis, to kind of try and influence the stewards, try and influence others, that he's not playing fair, gamesmanship, as it were. So there's that aspect to it, but I think it went beyond that, where he was genuinely starting to almost overthink the situation, or let his anger, as it would have been, mild level of anger, that frustration is, to build up a little bit too much, and then that clouds your judgment, because as every driver knows, that really it's, if you're thinking about what you're doing and how you're going to take the line or whatever it might be, you're going to be too slow. You have to drive instinctively. It has to just happen in real time, as it were. So you have to feel your way around the racetrack. You can't think your way around. And in order to feel your way around, it sounds easy, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, because you've got, as I say, all these other inputs coming into you that you can't help but think about or respond to, as well as your own thoughts. And I think that's what Lewis didn't manage as well as he normally does, with his own mindset, to be able to kind of shut all that noise out, or not let it in the first place, and really just concentrate on feeling his way around the track. And that, I think, is ultimately, what just got the better of him there. And understandably so, because while he can deliver almost robotic lap times when he's out in front, it's easy to forget he's actually is human at the end of the day as well. And I think that's what came across for me. It was lovely to see, it's his human side. It's that vulnerability, fallibility that came through, that we all get those moments. So he's not any different to any other driver. And I think that also, knowing that for those in the chasing pack, is kind of, useful to know, or provides hope, because he can be seen as a bit of, almost impossible to beat at times. Or what have we got to do? You've got to be on your best game and some. And I think this just shows you that actually, the guy's human as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think listening to the other drivers on that Netflix documentary, it did seem like the main things they were up against, one was pressure, and then the second was almost like the domination in the sport of Mercedes and Lewis that you can see now with Bottas. Looks like he's exiting. That it's almost a step too far as a possibility for people, it seems like.
I mean, I've got to jump in with the Bottas question because and the pressure. I think you've nailed it there, because that obviously there was a lot of pressure
crash
on
in the
him.
first corner.
Yeah, on the very first corner, that he's under pressure because he didn't get a good start. He was having a stuttering start. So you could say put himself under pressure from being in a good position, and that enabled him to kind of just lose his own concentration, focus, whatever you want to call it. But he ended up braking. I mean, it was some sort of 25 metres too late, really, when he should have been on the pedal. And at that time, obviously, it was very greasy as a circuit, not good conditions for traction or grip, and it was too late. So the rear end shunt and both being Red Bulls that he managed to take out. Only obviously added to the frustration then within other teams, and Christian Horner's views on that are kind of well documented. So it unintentional as it was, that to me was just that was looked like a good example of someone under pressure, and therefore as I love the expression I've heard sometimes, no one performs well with a gun to head, and yet a lot of people can think that that's some sort of motivator or driver in order to go well. And I think Bottas had his version of that going on, perhaps because it was uncharacteristic. He'd never been out on a first lap himself before. So to me, it was a racing incident. There's nothing more to it than that. But we have to get back to what's the root cause? Yeah. And to me, that's what it was. Maybe it was a bit his judgment was clouded, so he wasn't delivering what he does day in, day out.
Yeah, when I just look at him on that documentary and in general as well, I do question as to whether he's actually enjoying himself. Do you see what I mean? It's like, I know it can't be easy, as it were, to compete with Lewis when it looks like he's unassailable at times. Yet it still looks sometimes like he's not really enjoying it that much. You can never tell what's going on inside the racer's mind, as we're saying, but it looks to me like his position there is obviously under threat. But for a long time, it's kind of like possibly it'd be better off in a different team anyway. I don't know.
Well,
it's a difficult one because he's got the best car there. But you're playing second fiddle, and when you looked at someone like Ricciardo who left Red Bull, it was almost like he made a decision to say, "Look, I'm second fiddle to Verstappen here. I'd rather go somewhere where everyone's rooting for me." And it's not to say he's leaving because he wants to be the main man. I don't know if that's true, but maybe you just get a sniff that this team is set up for the main driver, and then the attention and the drive of the engineers around me is not quite on point. So how would that work anyway in terms of engineers? Say for example, I'm on a racing team. Has he got his own engineers, Bottas, and Lewis has got his own engineers? Yeah. And then so obviously the best engineers, who gets to pick? Let's say with racing, let's say Lewis is first pick. We're in the school playground and he's your first pick every time. Does he get first pick on the engineer, or is there a different way that it works? Because I'd imagine he's going to want number one F1 engineer guy by his side.
Yeah, I mean your team engineers and those around you there, that's an important aspect as well. And I don't think there's so much, as he gets, as you kind of allude to there, first dibs on everything. I don't think at Mercedes, I'm not privy to that inside knowledge, but I don't imagine that they have they don't have a number one outright driver policy as blatant as say Ferrari have done in the past. where it's very much the team totally geared around towards a single driver winning, and they're set up towards that, and you've got a supporting driver. I think Bottas has got, he's well resourced, he's got every opportunity to do it, and I think your assessment is probably not quite accurate when you talk about him leaving to be in a different car, because he's sort of no such thing as a number 2 driver really now. I think it's a tricky one, and there's lots of drivers that are in different.
But he is number 2, isn't he? He's not number 1 driver.
They get.
He won't be getting paid the same money. It's like a star striker. I could say,
of course,
he's my main man. He's my linchpin. He's Messi, and then these other guys are great, but they're getting paid 2/3 of what he's getting paid, and he's the number 1 asset of the team.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but I would imagine that Mercedes, they would have the resources would be equally shared. They'd be going for team resources, because what you've got to remember that the team is not so much geared around the driver for the reasons that they want to win the team championship, the constructors. So if you don't have both drivers finishing consistently high, the team is not really interested in the drivers' championship as much as the constructors' championship. So there's plenty of drivers, for example, that would love to be in the Mercedes seat, no matter what, they're in a different car, and relish the opportunity of going up against Hamilton and learning from him too, and going it. And which, let's not forget, Bottas has done well as well, where he's had his day and finished ahead. So, yeah, it's a tricky one. But yeah, you're quite right in what you're saying about, the pay structure and things like that. But I believe access to resources, equipment, I don't think that there's for example, a one-off or special component that Lewis would get before Vettel would get it. I don't think that would be the case.
Yeah.
But I as I say, you probably there'd be strict sort of team secrets that other people wouldn't know about that. But I'd imagine that the cars are very much equal. They would get equal treatment. And and I think Toto emphasises this because he talks about things of his dream, if you like, is leaving the drivers free to race, because again he realises the nature of the sport is competition, and he doesn't seem to be, to me, have that, let's just call it that, more Ferrari DNA, where you're really geared up around a number 1 driver, and as long as the red car wins, nothing else matters. I think he's much more around. He realises it has to be a spectacle. They're in the entertainment business, and the fans have to enjoy the race as well. So there's a lot of, I think, different aspects that go to it. But I know that's what he believes is really that sort of team orders. And when there has been challenges before, where there have been close racing between the 2 drivers, his number 1 rule is you do not knock the other guy out. You don't crash. You don't force the other guy to crash, because both cars not finishing or running off. That's not what it's about. But you go wheel to wheel. You challenge and push as hard as you can. But won't be tired, if you like, if someone gets it wrong, because that was the golden rule. And I think as long as they adhere to that, he's really happy to see them race.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was a shame for Ocon, because all the media attention seems to sit with Lewis still, and that battle with Alonso. But it must be great for him. Alonso has obviously played a massive part in him getting that victory and using all his nous, and it's kind of like like we said before, the pure driving spirit, where he's just going in, assessing a line and figuring out with a slower car how he can make himself difficult to beat. It's a bit like parking the bus in football, isn't it? That's what it reminds me of. Yeah. It's a bit like parking the bus, but maybe that's not the type of service. It doesn't quite capture it, because he's obviously highly skilled. For him to even produce that, they gave him like driver of the day, I think, on F1 because of that display. Yeah,
it's a driver skill that's F1's all about, and I think the difference with your analogy to football is that when teams just decide to try and form a wall, it's not seen as sporting, it's not entertaining, can kill the game from an entertainment point of view.
Yeah, it can do, yeah.
And no footballer, I don't think, would enjoy being asked to perform that role. So the difference.
I don't know. I think some do. Some enjoy the battle and the similar mentality. I would say there's a crossover in mentality of not being beat, even though the gap between ability is there, and obviously that's swayed in F1 by the car. So I guess you can encompass the extension of the car as ability, is the driver's ability. But in football, there's kind of like a way of taking a victory within a victory. You said about the story within the story.
Yeah,
it's almost like, yeah, we were under the cosh there for an hour, but we stood firm. And the entertaining side would be the last-ditch tackle, the block on the line, the keeper making an unbelievable save. That would be the form where it could become entertaining. What's not is when you completely crush the game and the ball just goes side to side and nothing really happens. There's no stories within the story, as it were. Because you can have a 0-0 draw, can't you? And it's thoroughly entertaining. But
absolutely.
I guess this is more akin to that version, isn't it? It's like a heroic holding the last stand, as it were.
Yeah, very much so. I think in the sport, it's seen that if you can defend your position well against a faster car, which could be because it's on fresher rubber, got less fuel in the tank, all sorts of reasons that a car will be undeniably quicker, and it's seen definitely as a skill as much as attacking to overtake, to be able to defend a position to the end of the race or whatever. That's equally as heroic, because it does provide just as much entertainment and can even be even more exciting than the reverse. So yeah, that's where the probably the similarity is different, and it is celebrated, and you'll get drivers that maybe can only attack. And if they're not overtaking or pushing the car to the limits, they're not able to defend and they're passed easily. And if you're overtaken by a car coming up easily, you're seen as less well equipped as a driver in skill set because you were passed easy. It's a bit like getting nutmegged in your football analogy there. As a defender, you'll be seen as a bit sloppy if that kept happening to you, or people would get round you easy. You've got to make yourself wide. You've got to make it difficult. And stand up, be strong and prevent that guy going by.
Yeah, I think even in football, when you haven't got those attributes, you might lack a bit of speed, you might lack a bit of agility, you might lack a bit of strength, but there's always a way to just position your body and make it difficult for the opposition. So I think that's what he did. But yeah, you can see it gets the crowd on their feet, and that's what people want to see on F1, is those moments where the unexpected happens, from last place to first place, or two people vying it out for the championship, Verstappen and Hamilton going wheel to wheel. That's what fans want to see. And I think from somebody who doesn't closely watch the sport, so I watch it from afar, I watch races. Like I said, I liked the drama, the storylines on Netflix. I'm sure some drivers were saying they overplayed them, and I don't doubt that, but it was great to just get an insight and understanding of the characters, the training they do, the mindset, things like with Haas, the arguments and the different cultures within each team. So I think just being able to not be flustered by the pressure. The pressure was just mentioned like it was like real solid and movable within F1 by all the teams and the drivers. I think just being able to operate without being flustered by that is just a massive advantage. And I think that's what it's going to take to bring a team up to Mercedes level like Red Bull are doing. They're on their way.
It's crucial.
And other teams. Because those moments you're gonna have to develop something that's not been developed before to catch him, or you're just gonna have to start finding little pockets, little margins that, and that's one of them, being able to hold someone off so your teammate can have a victory. All those different elements together, they're all a outpouring of a mindset, I think, a mentality to find a way.
Yeah, well, as it was set up, that was the difference, that Vettel wouldn't have had second place at the finish because he would have been inevitably overtaken by Hamilton, you would think, unless he'd done a great defensive drive. But with 10 laps to go, your money would be on Hamilton for sure. So, yeah, he's got a lot to thank Fernando for in that position, because he didn't end up getting challenged. And I think, again, speaking about the team radio, it's about, how you enable the driver to have a cleaner race as possible, in terms of a clean and clear mind, and not feed him extra your nervousness through the team radio. And arguably that's what happened with Seb, because when he was given the data on where Lewis was at, and it was confirmed, he's going to be right behind you with 10 laps to go, that in itself can make him push on, potentially force a mistake, or get him to ask too much out of the tyre or the car, when in the end, that never figured. So there's a fine line between giving the driver the information that he wants, for him to know what he needs to do and how much he needs to push or conserve, and on the other hand, as I say, just letting him go. And it was, Kimi's great at kind of telling, Kimi Räikkönen, that is, obviously he's not racing, but his quotes back to the on team radio are legendary, really, because he was one who, as I say, is a quiet guy. He just wants to be left to race, so his quotes, I know what I'm doing, and riposts like that when given information. It's almost, don't disturb me, I know how to drive the car, let me get on with it. You don't want that constant chatter.
Yeah, he's focused, he's in the zone, as it were, and he's well aware of the technicalities of the variables around the car and the track and the fuel himself, and he just wants to be left to it, and that's how he races best. But I think I did see something as well on there earlier, just on the website, talking about Carlos Sainz with Ferrari, and the team asked him to come in to refuel, and he stayed out. I don't know if it's an additional lap or whatever, but it worked out better because he had a bit of space, a clear air and a clear run. So that team dynamic between driver and team strategist and the team principal, I think that, like I suggested before to you, about having a former driver who is aware on this corner there's the opportunity, like Rosberg identified the key opportunity for Lewis before he actually found it himself. What do you think about that? Bringing somebody in who is a former driver and his only real role is to just stick on the radio, and if the driver's up for it, they're strategizing together in terms of where the hole might be to overtake, just because they've got the driver knowledge, they're inside, they've got the racer's mind mentality themselves, because they've been there and done it, and it's less geared towards the data and it's more about the feel. It's sharing where one driver feels the opportunity is. Do you think that would be valuable to a team, or do you think that's just overkill?
No, definitely will be valuable, because it's one thing to look at statistics, but your race strategy can, as you quite rightly pointed out there, that's a simulation. That's happening on the screen. Whereas in real time, you can't simulate real life. And a driver will know, as I say again, instinctively, should he stay out for another lap? What's the reason for that? And that's why ultimately it's the driver that's in charge. It isn't team orders. You come in when we say you come in, or you change your tyres now. He has to provide that information. And Lewis saw that again, talking with tyres, that at one point he said, they're shot, in so many words. And then a couple of laps later, he's reporting back, oh, hang on, the tyres got a second wind. And they go through these heat cycles and different levels of grip as the tyres are wearing, that they can come back. So it's only the driver, for me, who can make these decision calls, and that's why they'd ignore a pit call or anything else. That's what it's all about. You can't take that away from the driver. The team can't run the race from, as I say, behind a computer screen.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like one of the sports that's got the highest data analysis going on out of everything when you look at all the other different types of sports, because it's got a vehicle involved. There's so much analysis and data, yet you still need to, as a driver, you want to be aware of everything. And everyone wants to share that info.
Well, that was that.
End of the day, they want to feel it, don't they? They want to feel the drive, and they want to enjoy it. Sometimes you can get so bogged down in data and analysis, you forget. I just love to drive.
Well, that's where that quote come from, Haas, wasn't it? We're surrounded by data, but we're still not quick enough.
Yeah. I'll get that one. Add it to this podcast. Yeah,
that's a good quote.
Well, we got a lot of data, but we still run like dog shit.
That was a cracker.
And the other thing to bring into mind was talking of, data within sport. Obviously, it's becoming bigger in whichever sport you're in. I know that you could say that Formula One has access to the most, or there's a lot of sensors on the car, and they do have a lot of data. But the guy for me who nailed this subject was Alex Ferguson, when he sort of famously said, you can have all the data in the world, but the best data sensors that I've got are here. And he puts two fingers in front of his eyes and says, it's through looking through these, that's my data collector. And he uses that to know whether a player is fit, what a player needs to do next, and he'll trust that. So you could say again, he's a feeling manager, and you can't get that from the data. And if it was after all about the data, we could, I'm sure that we could create a bot or something to come up with the strategies and probably create the voice commands as well for what everyone needs to do. But thankfully, there's more to it than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that part of it, that just raw sense of when to dive into a corner and when not to.
Absolutely.
You take that out, and you kind of lose the heart of the sport almost.
Yeah, and that's where the driver excels. Obviously, is in poor conditions, and that's where data inputs and what you should do are even more ambiguous, because it's so much more to do with feel. And Lewis, he absolutely excels in the wet. Jenson Button was another driver before him that was amazing. If it was a wet race, he almost fancied his chance more than if it was dry. When he was driving the Brawn. And I think that this is, what it all comes down to is feel at the end of the day, and just having a clear mind to allow those inputs to come in, because there's information in that feeling, and you can rely on that.
Yeah, I think quite often you can come up with different names within sport, especially drivers, players, athletes in general, like pressure and anxiety and not really understand they're all kind of the same thing. They're all kind of a level of fear and anxious thought of what may materialise after the race, during the race, and what that might mean to you in life, and it can spiral out of control, and you kind of forget to enjoy yourself. So that, with that clarity, like you mentioned, of mind to just spot what's there and not be overcome by fear, is a massive asset.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth touching on. We've had a lot of attention or focus here on the drivers and what was going on, but the team have such a massive part to play as well. And obviously their part came more to fruition again on the negative side with Vettel at the end. of taking second place, enjoying the taste of champagne on the podium, only to find out later that he'd be disqualified due to not having enough fuel in the tank. So they failed to extract a litre from the car, and they're out by a long way. I think only got 300 mil out. So that again, you're causing the driver to be disqualified because the team hasn't managed the vehicle to be inside of the regulation. So yeah, there's a lot to it. So he's relying on them just as much as they're relying on him, which is wonderful that you can have team players that aren't, as you say, in the spotlight or the so-called top drivers and etc. Everyone's got a critical role to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that type of regulation and that type of rule in a sport, I don't myself, obviously, like I said, I've only got limited knowledge of the sport. It doesn't really make any sense to me, because I'm thinking, well, surely if you run out of fuel, if you haven't got a litre left at the end of the race, why does that matter? Because if you run out, then you're stuck halfway around the track. Is it a safety measure to stop that happening, or what's the actual thinking behind that as a piece of regulation and policy?
Well, it's to attempt to make sure that it's a level playing field at all times, in that no one can run that close to the wire where they perhaps have an unfair advantage. So as long as you say that at any time your car can be called in and you must be able to pull a litre of fuel from the tank, you then ensure that there's some no light weighting that can be gained from that to get advantage, and that again just keeps teams, another thing to monitor, keeps people on the ball, and you can't run light or in T, which, because what a team would like to do is calculate it so they end up pretty much running on fumes at the end, as it were. That will be a job well done. So
why couldn't you do that though? What's the downside to doing that? Because obviously one of the variables is all the different aspects of the car, and then the other variable is the driver, and then the other variable is the track and the weather, and then how they all integrate. Yet I would have thought that the fuel could be another exciting variable whereby so and so looks like they're going to win it, but they've underplayed it. They ran out of fuel on the last lap.
Yeah, well, it's also it's a safety measure. I mean, if you run out of fuel and you get stranded on a lap,
so that must be what it's all about. Then it's just
you could have a catastrophic failure or anything.
Yeah.
The idea is that you should, no one wants to see that, so it should be that you get over the line, and you've got sufficient so that it enables that process to take place. And those rules are constantly, I think it's one of the few sports where the rules are so constantly changing and evolving, whether it's based on safety or preventing unfair advantage or simply just trying to stop things that goes against the spirit of the sport, if you like, that the driver must be in control of all times and so on, so you don't get anything that's cheekily automated or anything else.
Yeah, usually it seems like there's a new innovation from a particular team, and then that can either be replicated by other people or they're a bit behind in replicating that, and then it's seen as an unfair advantage, and then they change the rules to offset that unfair advantage to keep it level, so there's not too much of a gap between the cars. But I guess
I think that's
that innovation, that creative process. It's kind of part of the sport, isn't it? And it's interesting that the same quality of mindset between the driver and the innovator within the team, that aligns, which is when you've got different roles that, a driver and a mechanic, sometimes you might be looked upon as completely different, and the process of driving and the process of design, which you've obviously got a lot of experience in, I think it's so interesting that the core and most productive mindset is still that clear mind.
Yeah, that's where the best ideas come in the car design, or how can you come up, as you say, with these innovations that people haven't thought of, that are completely left field, and you've got a unique advantage then because you've figured a way round a particular regulation. That is big fun of the sport as well. So the car reveal on race one is always interesting. To see who might have thought of something that someone else hasn't, and then if it is a good idea and it works and it's legal, then catch up is obviously what all the other teams have to do if it's shown that it is offering yielding a better time of X over a lap.
Yeah. Okay then, mate. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up?
No, a pleasure to talk about it, and as you say, I think there's so many stories that we could cover. It's nice to tease out a few aspects here and chat through it, so thanks so much.
It is. So we'll be back with another episode soon. Take care, and we will speak to you soon.